So thank you so much for letting me participate in this extraordinary conference. You know, I wanted to ask, how many of you took Peter up on his recommendation to get up with the sun and go running? Only one. Oh, did I misinterpret that? I didn't see him out there, actually. But for those of you that might not have heard his speech last night, he ended with, you know, keep running. You've got to keep running. Whether you're the lion or the gazelle in the picture, run when the sun comes up. So here we are again. We're running. We're running. So it's interesting to me to hear the vocabulary of rural. We have our own vocabulary. We have a common set of words we use, and some that I heard yesterday that I feel that I use these in everyday conversations with community, certainly asset-based. We can't have a conversation without using that phrase. Resilience, place-based, relationships and knowledge, stewardship, sustainable, commitment, leadership, locally driven, people-powered, and community-based. You know, there's not a formula to the work we do, which is why I love it, because there really are no two communities that are alike. As you might have discovered in this short window of time yesterday to just think about some of the assets, the unique assets your community has. And we all begin with what we have. That truly is the theme of the work that we do at Rural Development Initiatives and the work that I have spent my career helping communities, I've gone too far, helping communities engage with. So my agenda this morning in the next hour is to tell you a little bit about our Rural Development Initiatives nonprofit, to talk about the leadership services we offer, the economic vitality services, and then to go a little bit deeper into one of our programs, which we call WealthWorks. And I absolutely would be delighted if you had questions as I went, if you raised your hand, because I hope that our discussion this morning will spark you to think about how you can apply perhaps some of these tools to your community. So here's our mission, and it's funny, I was looking at Wallowa Resources mission over there, and I bet you we could all pull our mission statements out, and they're very similar. We all want vital rural communities. But specific to my organization, our focus is building, cultivating, strengthening people, leaders, to enable them to catalyze that community change and community vitality. So in taking the job that I now have, I had to really think carefully about, you know, I'm not an economic developer, certainly not in the way that some of you are in the hats you wear in the communities you serve. I am more a people developer in order to enable them to be the vehicle for the change that they want to see. That's really what capacity building is all about. That is the lens of my organization. So we have two business lines. One is community capacity building, and one is economic and business vitality. Just a quick history. We've now been around 25 years. Sorry, that should say 2016 was our 25th anniversary. And of course, you know, we tracked, I was looking at the maps that Nils shared yesterday, the decline in the timber industry. That was sort of exactly when we came into being. We were formed by the legislature in Oregon, who didn't have time or resources to go out into rural, and yet rural was so in distress. So we began in the Economic Development Department, and we began creating community economic development plans, helping communities rethink, what are we going to be now? You know, we've lost our mills. We've, in many cases, lost multiple mills. How do we move forward? So we did that for several years. We were spun out of that state agency in 1991 to become a nonprofit. For several years, we were blessed to have some state funding, and over time that disappeared, and we ended up working directly through a major funder, the Ford Family Foundation, who, coincidentally, their source of their wealth is Roseburg Lumber Products, the largest privately held timber company in Western United States. And so to this day, they are still one of our major funders. And they said, we really need to do more than these plans. We've really got to build the capacity of the people in the communities to help themselves. And whoa, then our leadership program was born. And for the next 12 years, we served over 88 hubs in Oregon. So a hub might be 2 or 3 small towns coming together. And you all, I'm just listening to you, you've got lots of hubs around your neck of the woods where a community 10 miles down the road, you know, you would join together to talk about how you can work together and be trained together and connect your assets to their assets. So over that decade, or 12 years about, we trained over 10,000 leaders in multiple classes and in these various hubs. So by the end of this training, they were training each other, which was, you know, to this day is an incredible gift, legacy, really. Those were the 663 community ambassadors who went on to wear that hat as, I'll be a community trainer. You know, they took a somewhat elevated role in ensuring the principles of leadership were engaged. And that's the number of some other of our accomplishments. And I'll say a little bit more about some of these other programs. But our legacy to Oregon at this time is those 10,000 trainers. And then that period ended. It ended somewhat recently when our main benefactor, the Ford Family Foundation, said, well, we've trained up all the communities we can bring to the table. Now we want to make sure that they do something with this leadership training. We want to see some action. Well, that certainly makes sense. We want people to be doing things with all the capacity that we've built. And hence, then we moved into the economic vitality arena. And you'll see in some of the programs I share that we are, by and large, very focused on getting people moving quickly to take action around their priorities. And those leadership graduates are in every single program, catalyzing and bringing others to the table. So isn't it cool when something that you plan and think and hope will happen actually happens? Because it has for us. Here we are today. We're much smaller than when we were at full-on, training up around the state. All those leaders were almost half the size we were a few years ago, which is fine. We're perhaps more focused, and we certainly work hard across Oregon and beyond. But our current budget is about $2 million, and our major funders are exclusively private foundations. We get maybe a tiny bit of funding from the United States Department of Agriculture for one of our programs. We get zero money from the state. So we are always working hard to earn our bread and butter to perform so we can be demonstrating the good results back to our funders to ask them for more money. So here's a picture of Oregon largely, but also you see the state of Washington there where we're beginning to expand, and Idaho where we are also expanding. So very much focused on the Pacific Northwest. We also go into California a little bit. And the dots on the map are just a picture of where some of our various programs are currently being implemented. In our leadership program, we talk early on about the Tupelo model, which is a community, Tupelo, Mississippi, very, very impoverished rural community back in the 80s when the apparel industry pretty much up and left. So they may not have had the timber issues we had, but they had their own industrial restructuring with the loss of another industry, and they were in the depths of their own depression. And they created this model that was actually probably defined by the Brushy Fork Institute out of Berea, Kentucky, that basically said, it mapped out what this community did, and it's the same message, the same theme we've all been hearing in every story that people share, that the only raw material we really have control over in our communities is the human beings that live there, and their attitudes, their passions, their commitments, their talents, their assets. So that is the base of this model that says you begin with those individuals and encourage them through leadership, organizational training to begin to play a role as leaders in community development and ultimately economic development to achieve what we all want, which is a healthier, more vibrant community. So this model is at the foundation of our thinking. It probably is intuitively to all of us, but we keep this in front of us. It's really important. So today, we continue to offer leadership services. We continue to use our leadership curriculum. We've taken this curriculum now to state of Washington, and there are still communities in Oregon who say, oh, the next generation has moved into our community. They need this training. So we figure out a way to help them deliver that program or for us to make that happen on their behalf. And how many of you have been through a leadership training course? Many of you, I imagine. So very focused on nuts and bolts skill building. And I can tell you as a community facilitator how I see leaders have gone through this program contributing is they come to meetings and they're organized and they know how to keep a group on track and they know how to facilitate and they know how to focus a discussion and then they know how to advocate for an issue and move that issue to the broader community by convening stakeholders. And it's a beautiful thing. So I'm a huge fan of our leadership program. I taught it with our leadership director for many years as a consultant. And these are some of the goals, some of the outcomes. We recently did an evaluation. Our funders like to see our impacts. And indeed, we were thrilled with the results. Of course, volunteerism has made a significant jump in these communities. But having individuals report on the personal impact that this program has had on them and their ability to think through problems, to make decisions, to network, to find resources, pretty doggone encouraging. And I'm very proud to say about a third of the graduates of our leadership program have gone on to play a role in their local governments, either as commission leaders or elected officials. And, so I've got my eye on a few of them that I know are headed for the governor's office someday, and it's quite wonderful. So we also have bite-sized pieces of our leadership program called Rural Skill Builders. Not everybody can sit through weekends of leadership training, but they still need help. And they need help with some of the basic skill building, as well as, I know in Oregon and Washington, we're very much focused on how do we integrate the rising numbers of Latinos that have entered our state that are making our states their permanent home. How do we work together across cultures so that we're benefiting from the best of the best that everybody has to offer. And then another facet of our leadership program is focused on one thing that we hear throughout every community conversation: we need help getting more money. So, all right, we're not going to do that for you, but we're going to train you how to do it for yourself. That's what our mission is. And so we have a wonderfully successful program called Learn by Doing, with a multiple, it's hands-on. You bring your organization's needs, you write grants in the class, and by golly, that trainer, Meredith Howell, does not let anyone escape without having a successful grant written. So the dollars, I can't keep up with the number of dollars that have come out of that class in terms of the results that have been achieved. So now I get to talk about my work, which I feel a bit of a missionary in the work that I do, because I so believe in the ability of rural communities to help themselves grow a stronger economy. And I'll tell you the process that we use. So I came on board at RDI about almost 3 years ago. A few of the programs were already in existence, and my charge really was create the strategy, guide us with market-driven, customer-driven programs and services, and then train up the staff, get out there, and deliver. Oh, and raise the money, by the way. Just so kind of soup to nuts, start the business, and run it. So first thing we did was, of course, we spent a whole lot of time talking and listening to the customer. What are you, rural community leaders? What's missing? Why aren't you feeling confident in being able to take charge of your economic future? Everybody felt, well, some of the main issues are frustrated around the language, the vocabulary, the players, knowing where to go and how to get help and what they had control over, maybe what the state might be doing, what the federal government might be doing. So these were common issues here. Connecting rural to urban markets, understanding what assets to build on, downtown revitalization and housing. I mean, these are just the absolute themes that we've worked to address in our programs. And then building the next generation of businesses and business owners. So this is sort of a list of our programs, and I've put them in two buckets. One is around community economic development, and the other is around business vitality services. I'm going to walk quickly through these programs and hope that some of them might resonate with you and perhaps be approaches that you're taking in your community. Now, one thing I'll say, so right now, I mean, we've probably served 30, 40 communities in the last 3 years. Right now, we're actively working in about 20. The majority of these are in Oregon. One thing I'll say is that these are programs that, regardless of your size, you can implement these programs in bite-sized pieces or with more elaborate groups, larger groups. But they are intended to be customized to each community, and they are also intended to be very accessible. In other words, we don't spend a whole lot of time planning and strategizing. One of the comments people made was, we have so many plans, we don't know what to do. We don't look at them. They don't connect to us who are on the street trying to grow a business. So let's not put the plans away, but let's just acknowledge them and see what good we can have from them, and then let's move to action. So real quick, I'm going to give you an overview of our economy. In the history of economic data tracking in our employment department, we have never had an unemployment number this low. it's a bit scary. We're at beyond full employment, and I'm not sure if this is true in Canada, but in America, we are on the verge of a significant national workforce crisis as baby boomers, like some of us in this room, retire over the next 5 years, and we have not replaced ourselves for the workforce demands of today.
Although in BC, apparently we have good numbers for people working, we have an enormous amount of working poor.
Yes.
Can't afford to live indoors, even though they have a job. Is that reflected in Oregon?
Yes. It's our low wage, but that's one of the reasons. It's one of the drivers of we raised our minimum wage. We have the second highest minimum wage of anywhere in the country. We're moving towards $15 an hour because the jobs are, the growth sectors, not all, of course, but many of the jobs are in the lower wage sectors. So in order to bring people up to a standard of living where they can afford the necessities of life, we're working on it from that angle. So you can see that I asked my staff member to point out some of the rural communities here with the highest unemployment. I mean, this is unprecedented that these numbers are not in double digit. So they're all extremely low. And a couple things have happened, of course. We could spend a lot of time thinking about this, but one of the things that happened is anybody that wanted a job that they left in the economic restructuring. So population decline or stabilization is certainly one of the key challenges in some of the rural communities. So, where unemployment is low, many folks did move on to other places. So we have 36 counties. 23 are considered rural, not affiliated with a metropolitan area. Extremely diverse economies. I'm sure that's true here too, but just extremely diverse based on the natural resources of the area, from rivers to mountains to valleys to ranching. And just another figure, coming out of the Great Recession, 17 of these 23 counties have not recovered. They've not, the total numbers are below, job numbers are below. So the dominant sectors, services, that includes healthcare, that's growing everywhere. Government, agriculture, of course, and tourism, which is a service-based industry. And the challenges are, you've heard these over and over. The number of older folks is growing, and the youth population is declining. So we absolutely use asset-based community economic development. There's no other way. There's no other way in my mind. I'm not going to walk through this because you've already had a whole morning on ABCD approach, but it's the basis of all of our programs, and in particular, the WealthWorks program that I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. So here's one of the back of the envelope. Anytime we go into a community, we always begin putting a map together of who's already there, right? We have to work with all of the partners, be they government, nonprofit, community. So we start putting that picture together of the folks that we need to connect with, and we need to be sure that we leverage. And we also do our own assessment of where, based on the conversations with communities, where we think people are at, because we want to begin where they are and take them to the next level, rather than making assumptions that they can move all the way up that Tupelo model, over the next 6 months, maybe during the course of a program delivery. So this is our internal assessment, that of the communities that we have been working with across the state, about 40% are really still struggling, trying to bring a cohesive group together let alone have identified risk takers and innovators and forward thinkers. About 35% are just sort of in that murky, undecided. We know we need to do something. We don't know what to do. We're not sure who our leaders are. About 15% are fairly progressive. They're working some of those strategies. They know they have resources out there. They're trying to connect to them. And then maybe 10% are pretty advanced, proactive, dynamic. So you can imagine, we have a different role to play in each of these community situations, but we view ourselves as facilitators, catalysts, coaches, and mentors in many places. So here's a picture of all the rural economic vitality programs we have. And because no two communities are alike, and because the issues that they surface are often sliced a little bit differently, we've tried to develop responsive programs that fit them where they are, so that we're connecting where they're excited to go. And in some communities, well, I'm going to walk you through these real quickly, but you can see many of these are rather new programs. So we've been killing ourselves, frankly, piloting a lot of these simultaneously. It's been great fun. Summits, I'm sure some of you have economic summits. This is sort of a regional convening. People know they need to get their partners together in the same room. These folks, it's community driven. We let them decide what the top 3 issues are they want to hear about. We bring in experts. We make sure all the partners get invited. It's an event, but they do action planning at the end, and they do identify who's going to take the lead in moving toward implementation. This is just one of the towns we worked in last year. It's actually not a town. It's a river area with about 5 or 6 towns. So they focused on tourism. They still had a functioning mill. They wanted to talk about some natural resource issues related to keeping that mill open, youth engagement, and then just bringing a stronger network together across these 5 communities in the canyon. Some of the outcomes from these summits, Rural Tourism Studios, a rather focused program on how to improve your tourism assets, bike tourism, urban renewal, downtown beautification. You can see the list. But the bottom line is, in every instance, we've done about 11 of these, regional momentum has been raised up, and you've got people talking to each other and working together who never before took the time to do that. Paso Sal Éxito is our Latino entrepreneurship program. It is broken into 2 main parts. We'd certainly recruit partners to the table, but it's broken into financial literacy and entrepreneurial training, and a very, very successful program. Now, we've had 350 Latino entrepreneurs served since 2014 in multiple communities, of course. We've only had 7 businesses come out of that, but I say that's a success because just as many folks or more have decided they aren't ready to take their life savings and put it into a business because they had to do more work on their business plan. And frankly, that's success to me, keeping people from making poor investments. Business mentors, trainings, lots of technical assistance, so 21 different communities served. That's pretty extraordinary. One of my favorite programs, because I get to run this one, is called Economic Vitality Roadmaps. So this is our answer to getting quickly to action and engaging people in their priorities, ensuring that they've got workable action plans, and training them up to move forward on the priorities that they've identified. Again, community-driven people. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but wherever that community that group of community leaders says they need to focus, we help them begin to delve into that issue. So it's very different in very different places. But the bottom line is they are trying to bring more jobs and grow their job space. Of course, it's very focused on the economics. So these are our goals. A data-driven, we do start with a quick data-driven assessment from the perspective of why would a business locate in your community? What's that business looking for? And what do you have, or what are you missing that might be something to work on? So that sets them right into the trenches right away. So it's a data-driven process. We of course, engage the business community, the community leaders, the politicians, and quickly move to consensus on priority initiatives for action. Sure, we've all been in meetings, right? We've got a list of 20 things we want to do. And the driving force of this process is we can't do them all at once. And through through a conversation and basically a democratic process, we say, let's pick 3 things we want to work on, and then we begin to work on those with a 90-day action plan, not a 3-year action plan, not a 5-year strategic plan. What are we going to do in the next 90 days together to see results? It works. So here's a quick overview of, again, this process. By the way, we don't look at economic development exclusively as one spoke on the wheel. It's a part of the wheel. We recognize that there are many facets of this work, and they are all connected to each other. You all know that. That's common sense. And in some cases, as in the wonderful model we heard about yesterday in Minnesota, arts and culture could be the economic driver. That was a pretty cool story. So we make sure we hold up the mirror. We look at about 50 variables, and this is the only role that my organization plays, where we sort of serve as the technical consultant. We bring all the data together and make it really easy to access, to understand. Here's how you compare to that community down the road that you think you're always competing with. And oh, by the way, here's what the businesses said who might have left town last year. And here's what the ones that are looking to locate or are already here, here's what they're concerned about. So we make it really tangible and meaningful in that assessment piece, and that becomes the basis for generating the list of issues and then setting priorities. Lapine was our pilot. That's a very small one of the ugly towns that if Peter were here, he'd be okay with me saying that. They would say it to themselves, so they knew they don't look very good. They got really, really bad first impression. So among their top priority was actually 2 goals around image and marketing and beautification. And they've just had enormous success in the 2 years since they did their roadmap. They have a campaign that is now being emulated around the state called Put the Shine on Lapine. And you can go anywhere in that town and people are involved in that movement. It goes on, right? We never stop beautification. And of course, they're working on many other things, but this is one that you can participate at any level. You can be a school kid, you can be a senior, you can be a business owner. In fact, there's plenty of examples in the town now where people are helping each other. But here's one of the cool things that came out of this process. We had a funder roundup meeting because you can imagine lots of projects, lots of funding needs that came out of the roadmap. And so we invited about 20 funders to come to Lapine, and the community made the presentations and said, we have consensus, we know what our projects are, here's what we're working on this year, but we need your help. And, we had funders, like, instead of the other way around, of you community leaders going to the funder trough, the funders were going to the community trough. It was pretty extraordinary. And because they saw the focus, they saw the sense of commitment and working together. It was really cool. I could talk on and on about that program because I just see anybody. You can do this. If you're a town of 500 or 5,000 or 50,000, you can do a roadmap and quickly organize to begin working together. So one other anecdote in another community I'm working in, well, they kept saying to us over and over again, we've never done anything like this. And I just going, what do you mean you've never done anything like this? We've never come together as community members and talked to each other about what we wanted to do. Because they don't turn back the agenda to the city or to the county or the state. They have control. And they've never had that sense of empowerment. It was always this very strong stronghold that the local government had on what went on in that town. And it was a tricky dynamic. We had to coach on both sides there, giving the city permission to say, it's okay. They're not going to ruin your water system. They're really not focused on that. They're focused on things like improving the properties and bringing young people together and growing the business base. It's really okay. It was very interesting. Business retention. Does anyone here have a business retention expansion program? Excellent. Well, common sense. Economic development strategy. Begin at the beginning with what you already have. The businesses are already invested in your community. How do we keep them? How do we grow them? How do we make them stronger? My colleague, Michael Held, who runs our BRE program, is over in Edmonton this week with the International Business Retention Group. I believe he's been invited to join the board as the rural representative. Now, once again, this is a capacity building program. So we are not telling the businesses how to improve themselves, how to be successful. We're training the local community leaders to reach out to their businesses in a safe way and connect those businesses to resources and circle back to provide assistance to help those businesses grow. It's a beautiful program. It's so simple and it works so well. So these are the focuses, and it's again one of those common sense approaches. 80% of job growth comes from existing businesses, so why wouldn't you start there? And again, it's asset-based, of course. So in many communities, this is the Dalles, Oregon. It's a town of just about 10,000 on the Columbia River. This was our pilot, and they focused on downtown because they had a pretty significant downtown, and they had a strong program manager. I forgot what I was going to say about that. Maybe it'll come back. Oh, red flags. So, a red flag in a business retention program is, I'm closing up shop. My last day will be, December 31st. Oh. If that's a business you want to keep in your town, well, you're going to figure out what to do to help that business owner transition, create an exit strategy, or stay, overcome their problems. That's a classic red flag. Another red flag might be, I know in the Dalles, they had several businesses that wanted to relocate out of there. They didn't want to close up, but they wanted to move out of town or move out of the downtown. So how do we, you can just picture, that's all hands on deck, right? So what do we do? How do we spend a lot of time listening to what's really going on and figure out if there are some ways to connect that business owner to some resources? So here are some of the results in the Dalles. 22 businesses receiving, this is in about a 6 to 9 month process. Team of 30 members involved. They go out in teams of 2. That's 15 teams. going out and talking to the businesses and bringing the information back and digesting it, referring to business resources. Last program, First Impressions. Well, it's not quite the last. First Impressions is another one of those bite-sized piece programs. Like many of you, you're trying to make hay while the sun shines, literally, and bring tourists to your town. And so First Impressions is a program that makes sure you're making the best first impression you possibly can so that people don't drive through town, but they park, get out, start walking around and spending money. Ringing cash registers, that's really the goal of this program. And it's a simple assessment process. The goals begin to focus, they tend to focus on physical improvements that will have a big impact and make a big difference that volunteers are eager to work on. Here's this sign on the right side. We do look at the physical environment, the pedestrian environment, and the business environment. And here's a town, Grants Pass, Southern Oregon. This sign about keeping off the sidewalk was like every 10 feet in the downtown. It was like, really? Is this necessary? Wasn't too welcoming, you can imagine. So we had to take a few pictures of that. Now, the fun part of this program is people participate. They choose to participate in a variety of ways. It's a small budget program. You want to team up with a community down the road, so you're assessing each other. That's like we're just the facilitator. We help make it happen. We train people up. We give them the assessment forms. We help them, just get through the process. Again, it's a very quick process. Within 2 months, they're implementing what comes out of that assessment. Because it's usually pretty simple stuff. A lot of it's cleanup. And even in places where it's bigger than cleanup, they're able to move forward. There's another approach where, we might come in as a facilitator and an advisor, or lastly, we organize the team. We bring in half a dozen people who've never been to the town before, maybe a tourist industry rep from across the state, or a volunteer leader from another town that we've known, and they love it because, it's like a secret shopper program, right? And it really, really provides incredibly valuable, useful insights, and it's very visually oriented. We do taking pictures constantly, and then that goes into a presentation. So it's not just sort of saying, well, we saw a lot of garbage on that street. It's like documenting it. We saw some things that probably you would want to address before visitor season starts up. And those are highly varied. We also spend a lot of time on education because we can't be everywhere all the time. So we do a webinar series. This is the one we did last fall. 6 or 5 hot topics, we call them. Oh my goodness, everyone's concerned about the housing shortage, and everyone's always eager to learn from other communities on how they've organized around economic development. Where are the funding sources? How do we get more money to our businesses? There's some common themes here. So these are panel and resource presentations. Very interactive, though. We work really hard to do that, even though it's a webinar. And every other year, we have a very large rural conference, Regards to Rural. I invite you all to come next May, and perhaps some come as panelists. It would be great to be sharing cross borders. We are actually, for the first time ever, doing this conference in Portland because the theme is urban-rural and bridging the divide. We will not be focused on politics, although they might be the driver. In fact, it's my charge to look at the integration of rural-urban economies, so I'm really eager for specific stories about that. So I really look forward to seeing some of you at our conference next year. So I'm going to pause. I have about 8 minutes to go through WealthWorks. I wonder if I should do this maybe just really quickly. This is a whole other, almost a workshop in itself. It is a workshop in itself. But WealthWorks is a much bigger, more sophisticated approach to helping truly challenged rural regions figure out a long-term, systemic, sustainable approach to economic development that isn't a flash in the pan. I'm going to walk you through quickly. Has anyone heard about WealthWorks? So we began about 5 years ago when we heard about this program that was being piloted pretty much on the East Coast and in rural southern part of the U.S., funded by the Ford Foundation and the Aspen Institute. And so there is a national network of organizations on the ground in extremely rural, impoverished regions of our country, working on a systems approach to community-based economic development. It's long-term. These are some of the examples. You can go to the wealthworks.org website, and there's a lot of case studies now of regions that have had success. We're a little further down in terms of the same number of outcomes because we've only been at this for about 2.5 years. But some of the stories are incredible. And the majority of them are very focused on, of course, natural resources and agriculture. Although one of my very favorites is the reemergence of the textile industry in North Carolina. It's just an incredible case study of the new generation of apparel designers and apparel makers who needed all the skills that we had 40 years ago in the South to be successful. And they brought them all back on a smaller scale. It's just one of many examples. So we actually have many partners in this program because it was larger scale than some of the other economic development programs I mentioned, much more ambitious, more complicated, and longer term. So we called these group of funders our learning partners, and we told them, you're going to be learning with us. So know that you are investing in that learning. And they, of course, they were all in agreement. You know, you kind of saw this difference in approaches with Peter's presentation yesterday on the ABCD model, right? So we point out that the WealthWorks approach is very unlike traditional economic industrial development for all those reasons I've already said. You know, it is community-based, it's community-led, it's asset-based. It's not about importing, Facebook and Google to your community. We have a lot of those facilities settling in rural in Oregon. And where do the dollars go? After the wages, the dollars go back to California or wherever they're investing and overseas. So, it's about keeping the wealth local. And it's a powerful initiative and framework, not for the faint of heart, not for those that want quick results. And here's, I'm just going to hit lightly on some of the key themes. Wealth is bigger than dollars and cents, and it's bigger than jobs. And, this is where, boy, you're going to see so many parallels to what an asset-based approach is, because you have wealth in all of these categories in your community, but you just don't think about it that way. So this is one very important framework for the WealthWorks approach. Of course, the goal is improving livelihoods, creating wealth locally, and keeping the wealth local, and keeping it. What is? Wealth. Oh, so sorry. Well, that was definitely a late night.
It shows I'm paying attention.
Thank you. All right. Oh, I apologize. So it does combine community and economic development approaches. It's a systems approach because it focuses on creating a value chain. That's a big phrase. but we spend a lot of time on explaining and building a value chain. I'll show you some quick examples. I won't go through the history, but we did end up working with 6 very distressed, long-term, underutilized economies in our state. One of them actually includes Wallowa County, where Nils and Wallowa Resources is from. And these regions actually competed to participate in this program. They got a small grant to help them get organized and fund a local facilitator. And we ended up, we were the coaches, the trainers. These are some of the value chain concepts, sectors that these different regions focused on. Food. Food was absolutely at the top of the list in many of these regions. So here's one example in Northeast Oregon where plenty of barley growing and some really unique types of barley, but it hadn't been converted into malt, which is an essential element of beer. So the overall theme was we want to create, the first all Oregon ingredient beer. And their value chain was focused on, we called it the barley to beer value chain. Very successful. They had some entrepreneurs that were in the middle of this value chain doing all kinds of experimental, innovative things. And they connected the dots and now, of course, are very connected to the folks in the community that are engaged with the tourism industry because they're trying to promote this unique asset and this unique beer as people are traveling around sampling beers. So the value chain concept, I won't go into this too much except to say that you can imagine if you're looking at creating a success, it's a framework, right? And that framework is looking at more than money and more than jobs. It's looking at other values and the other forms of wealth to help you succeed as a community, a set of communities working together in a region over time. I'll just flip through these quickly. Collaboration, essential ingredient. You are forming through the WealthWorks process. Collaboration, by definition, is a new partnership that doesn't exist. And that is what WealthWorks is all about. So we begin by helping this collaborative group identify the sector they want to focus on. That's usually pretty easy because you know what your assets are. These are some of the sectors people began with. These are ones that communities began to explore. And then they took it a step further and said what they wanted to do with that sector to grow it. And oh, by the way, there is an overarching theme around serving people on the margins. That's essential. How do we engage people that are not traditionally at the economic development table to grow their skills, their experiences, their potential for entrepreneurial success, and to actually ultimately own some of those assets that are created out of this WealthWorks initiative? It's a demand-focused, demand-driven process. You've got to track the demand, and you've got to understand that there is strong demand in your market, however you define that, for the product that you are hoping, the gaps you're hoping to fill in that value chain. And of course, now you can see that if we were together for the afternoon working on this, we would begin to dive into the sectors you would want to explore, your thoughts on how to go out and determine demand. But for those of you that are working on food hubs, I've got some great examples that I'm happy to share. A lot of other information outside of our time we have today of communities and regions that have gone quite far on their own to successfully identify gaps in the market that local community-driven endeavors have been successful at filling around building a successful value chain. South Coast, another cool cool region, very, very remote, very cut off. Started off with food and ended up sort of diving much deeper to a focus around fish and seafood, which is really where they had the biggest gap in their value chain. Because, does this sound familiar? You've got this incredible resource, some of the most precious fish coming out of, really clean waters, and it's being transported across the country, or it's being transported from 6 hours away up to the Portland market, and people that live there can't access it because there's no place to buy it. Whoa, something's wrong with that picture. We also measure how we're doing, and we looked at all the regions. We piloted this work in. We looked at all the capitals that people identified as having a measurable impact, and we're pretty proud of the results that we've had, though people are moving at a different pace. This is a complex process, keeps me on my toes, but I do love it because in many, many rural places, you have to do it yourself, and you're going to have to think bigger and differently than ever before. So I am at the end of my time.